Guilt and shame, they kept me stuck in a cycle of on again, off again drinking for so many years because deep down I believed I should be able to control it. I thought it was me that was the problem. Hello, welcome to the Alcohol-Free Lifestyle Podcast. This is Sarah Connelly, one of the coaches in the program. One of the greatest obstacles for those that want to change their relationship with alcohol is the belief that they are somehow a bad or weak person. Add this to the fear of breaking up with the trusty go-to solution for uncomfortable feelings, and it's not surprising how long it can take for people to finally make the decision and commitment to change. The reality is that when we feel bad about ourselves, it is very, very hard to instigate change. We are living in our heads, we are criticizing ourselves, we are feeling bad about ourselves. And the reality is, when we feel bad about ourselves, there's only one thing that we want to do. And we know what that is. In my experience, the root of this shame often comes down to unrealistic expectations of ourselves. And these expectations are based on false beliefs and false ideas about how we should be, and that we should be able to control, that we should be stronger and more resilient. But the reality is that every day I meet strong, resilient, intelligent people who have fallen into the trap of becoming dependent on alcohol. Whether they're dealing with daily stresses of their lives or using it as a tool to socialise or network, almost all of these people have taken in the messages that serve to make them feel bad about themselves. They struggle with shame, believing somehow that they are fundamentally flawed. And when the shame takes over, the habit of numbing the uncomfortable feelings becomes really hard to break. Somehow it seems so hard for us to actually believe in what is true, that there is nothing fundamentally wrong with a fallible human being who, for a multitude of contributing factors, becomes dependent on a highly toxic and addictive substance. This is a substance that's readily available, glamorized in society, and it makes us feel immediately better when we drink it. So why do we believe this to be our fault? The most important and factual messages are the ones that aren't advertised or promoted in glossy magazines or online these days. The fact is, we are all flawed and we are all vulnerable, and others will prey on our vulnerabilities in order to sell us stuff. Addictive stuff. We are sold a lie. This lie is the solution to all of our problems, and we end up believing that if we can't handle this solution, then it's somehow our fault. When the bar is set unrealistically high by the messages we're bombarded with, like drink responsibly, I'm just giving an eye roll to that one, it reinforces the idea that something is really wrong with us. And here enters shame. It's highly likely, in fact, that most people over a certain age in the Western world have succumbed to some level or some type of addiction, whether that be alcohol, drugs, food, work, shopping, power, even exercise. So isn't it reasonable to suggest that addiction is really simply part of the human condition, and what we become addicted to is not so much a choice, but in fact the result of a multitude of factors and circumstances? If you were raised in a country where alcohol was forbidden, you would struggle to become addicted to it, even if you were someone that had a sensitivity to the substance. We are a product of our environment, and the environment plays a huge role not only in our behaviours but in how we think and feel about our behaviours. I suggest that addictive behaviour is not the exception, it's the norm. What varies is the substance and or behaviour and the level to which one becomes addicted to it. And this is dependent on a multitude of variables. Your unique biochemistry, your experiences, your genes, the environment you grew up in, the environment you now live in, what has happened to you, how you think, your peer group, childhood trauma, how you were taught to see the world. The list goes on and on. So how on earth can we package all of this up under a banner of bad or weak? There's so much that we don't know about the brain and about human beings, but it seems it's simpler and more natural for us to rely on the unreliable, on how we should be, on how we should behave, on how we should feel. And we add to that the comparison that we all make to others, the perfect others that we see on Instagram and social media and in the media in general. And that comparison always leads to us thinking and finding all the ways that we are not up to standard. We ask ourselves questions like, why am I struggling? What's wrong with me? Why can't I change? Which all leads and reaffirms this assumption that there's something wrong with us. That we are somehow unique in our badness or weakness is interesting. But we live into these assumptions in the same way that a child who is told incessantly that they're naughty will so often live into that label. When we make the decision that something is wrong with us at our core, we feel shame, which is often accompanied with guilt. And in our minds we can become victims, helpless and isolated. When we feel bad about ourselves, as I said earlier, we crave the one thing that got us here in the first place. The people I know who are successful at quitting alcohol, myself included, learn over time to refuse to allow shame into the mix. We learn not to strive for perfection or to judge ourselves against unrealistic benchmarks. There is a sense of acceptance that we have arrived where we are due to a multitude of factors, some of which we had no control over. And what this leads to is a realistic, kind and resolute frame of mind. And we compare this with a willingness to take responsibility for taking the action that is required to change. And this can lead not only to freedom from alcohol, but also to a greater sense of self-acceptance and empathy for oneself and others, which has a huge impact on all areas of our life. In short, it's about accepting the challenge of the experience, of seeing the challenge as an opportunity for growth, and of committing to doing our best to overcome it, with the goal of striving to become the best version of ourselves that we can be. It would be strange if you met someone who said to you, "I'm just doing my best. I know I'm flawed, but I'm working every day to improve myself so I can live a life that's more aligned with my values." And if your reply was, "Shame on you." And yet, if you're trying your best to conquer the part of yourself that has become dependent on alcohol, that is exactly what you are doing. So my point for this episode is to really reinforce the fact that shame has no place in this experience. I understand why we feel it. I understand that we feel that it has some kind of purpose, maybe a motivational purpose, but the reality is it just serves to keep us stuck. It just serves to keep us feeling bad about ourselves and small and helpless, and it does not in any way help us to move forward and to start really taking control of our drinking habits. I don't necessarily believe that we can eradicate shame altogether, but we can certainly recognise it and see it for what it is. So when shame inevitably arises, whether you have a slip up or you're focusing on all the things you did wrong in the past, I invite you to try and remember this. There is absolutely no shame in being human, and there is absolutely no shame in not being perfect. A perfect human being just simply doesn't exist. Sometimes giving ourselves the grace to simply be human can be unfamiliar and uncomfortable. It's rare for so many of us to actually be kind to ourselves, So it's important to note that this process of eradicating shame does require us to be really nice to ourselves, even if it does feel uncomfortable, because it's the only place from which we can create the strength and compassion that we need for meaningful and lasting change. If we change from a place of fear and guilt and shame, we might be successful for a period of time, but eventually those feelings will bubble up to the surface again and we'll find ourselves battling again with that inner critic. So I invite you to give yourself permission to, wherever you are in your journey, to just be kind to yourself, to apply compassion, to apply understanding based on the knowledge that nobody's perfect, that everybody feels shame and guilt, and that all of us are struggling in some way, shape or form to navigate our way through what can be an incredibly difficult experience as a human being on this planet. No matter where you are on your drinking journey, I am delighted that you've spent the time to listen to this episode, and I encourage you to do, if you do nothing else, just to be really kind to yourself today. If you'd like to learn more about the alcohol-free lifestyle programs or for free resources, you can go to the description that's underneath this podcast, where there are links to the Alcohol Freedom Formula, which is a free program that James offers, and also links to book a call with one of our coaches if you'd like to get more information about our program. In the meantime, thanks again for listening, and let's get rid of shame.
Hi there, this is James Swanwick. Thank you so much for listening to the show. I would be so grateful if you would leave a review. That will help us climb the rankings and get our show exposed to so many more people who could really benefit from the content. You can do that by going into Apple Podcasts, rating the show, writing a little one-sentence summary, and posting it. That would be so amazing. Thank you. Likewise, if you would like to schedule a 15-minute exploratory call and apply for our Project 90 program, then you can do so by going to alcoholfreelifestyle.com/project90. If you'd like to get the free guide, that is the Alcohol Freedom Formula Guide, you can go to alcoholfreelifestyle.com/guide. Our YouTube channel is at alcoholfreelifestyle.com/YouTube. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at James Swanwick. Thank you so much for listening. We so appreciate you, and we'll catch you on the next one.